All right, so today we're going to look at combined physical and cognitive exercise resulting in decreasing performance, otherwise known as fatigue. Quick sequence of events. We're going to look at the introduction, go through the methods, look at the synthesis findings and results, and then dive into the discussion just a bit. Performance fatigue right now within the research literature is commonly interpreted from the perspective of physical, mental, central, or peripheral elements influencing performance. Most studies look at the impact of cognitive fatigue on physical performance or physical fatigue on cognitive performance, or examine the purpose of identifying whether performance failure was due to fatigue from peripheral or central systems. But there's no apparent distinction between the nervous and muscular systems, in that they act in an interconnected manner, causing adaptations and manipulations to one another constantly. For example, if we look at metabolic and mechanical alterations due to fatiguing muscle contraction, these result in increased afferent feedback. So would we classify this as central fatigue or peripheral fatigue? Basically, this compartmentalized taxonomy of fatigue has failed to acknowledge the nature of the dynamic system's adaptive accommodations for a continuous workload and continued performance. The rate-limiting adjustments made by the system under fatiguing conditions also depends on the task. So if we look at maximal voluntary contractions, which is an index of muscle fatigue, we see that fatigue during low-intensity activity is largely attributed to reduced neural activation, while high-intensity activity is found to more likely be caused by a decline in contractile function. So again, challenging one system will not provide us information about real-world situations. So the objective of this review was to examine current literature on combined cognitive and physical activity resulting in decreasing performance or fatigue. We only included studies if they involved a dual task protocol consisting of exercise with an ongoing cognitive task, or alternately the intermittent performance of exercise and cognitive tasks. They also had to measure fatigue associated with this task performance, consisting of either observing decreases in performance over time or subjective measures of fatigue. We searched on PubMed, Sport Discus, and PsycInfo, all possible combinations here, and came up with 4,879 articles. Now, after applying our inclusion criteria, we ended up with a whopping 5. We took these 5 articles and threw them into analysis, and remembering that our inclusion criteria included anything involving a dual task fatiguing protocol, we actually found that 3 of these articles put larger emphasis into specific exercise intensity for optimal arousal and cognitive performance, rather than looking at the fatigue induced. One study observed the influence of sport-specific intermittent exercise on perceptual cognitive processing, and the other observed the effect of increasing cognitive load on cognitive motor dual task isometric strength endurance. 2 of these studies used cycling protocols, 2 used treadmill protocols, and 1 used isometric quadricep contraction. This last one was the only one that performed exercise to exhaustion, making it the only which had measurements on fatigue's pervasive impact on cognition and physical performance. So overall, research on realistic exercise tasks that induce fatigue is significantly lacking. Since fatigue is entirely task dependent, the only way to study fatigue in the real world is to study realistic tasks, which all require cognitive processing and physical action. Because of this, we must be able to quantify fatigue within both of these systems or combined, which means that exercise protocols must be to exhaustion or time trials or maximal voluntary contractions, etc., as well as using subjective measures of fatigue. And finally, the most ideal way to study fatigue within sports may be to analyze existing sport environments. We could quantify the complexity of decision-making, putting different levels of cognitive physical demand on the athlete, and observe decreasing physical, tactical, and technical measures over time, as well as taking subjective data on fatigue. Here are some references. Thanks so much for watching.